Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most easily identifiable clown types. Whether you've seen them at a circus or even a birthday party, I know that you might be curious about the origins of this clown. So put a token into the Bouncy Arcade Machine as we learn about the Auguste Clown. The Auguste Clown is a clown that is known for its playful nature in America and its human relatability in Europe. From birthday parties, parades, the theater, or even traditional circus settings, you can find this style of clown all around the world. When it comes to the Auguste Clown, the origins are shrouded in myths and legends, but also harsh realities and painful truths. While there is joy and happiness, there is also pain and suffering. I'd like to issue a content warning going forward as we deal with sensitive yet necessary topics midway through. This video will address racism, classism, slavery, minstrelsy, and blackface. So with that being said, if you've chosen to continue, let's get into the history and evolution of the Auguste Clown. You may have noticed that the term Auguste is a little strange. Like, where exactly did that come from? A British author named M. Wilson Disher said that the origins of the Auguste Clown's name can be traced back to a German-born American acrobat and clown named Tom Belling, who became the first Auguste in Berlin by accident. Apparently, Tom Belling was dressed as a ringmaster, and he stumbled into the circus ring by accident. In order to play off that he had this clumsy mishap, he started to pretend he was drunk, and this was when the audience was able to see right through him, and they started to yell at him, Auguste, Auguste, which was supposedly German slang for fool. This story also has other variations, like some saying that Tom Belling missed a bunch of cues in his performance, and in order to save face to the audience, began to mock the ringmaster. Some sources tell a story which seems to be a combination of both of these stories, which say that at a circus in Germany in 1869, Belling was mocking his manager by wearing ill-fitting clothing and mimicking his behaviors to entertain his friends. He was doing a terrible impression of the manager, and then the manager himself was said to have walked into the room. So Belling panicked because he was caught, and he ran out into the ring by accident, tripping in front of everyone, which caused the audience to then yell, Auguste, Auguste. Ironically enough, this version also says that Belling's manager wasn't mad, but he demanded him to perform as this, quote, Auguste Clown from there on out. The thing is, though, these legends have been somewhat disproven because the term Auguste in German didn't even exist until after the Auguste character became popular. Like, Auguste in German, I'm pretty sure just means Auguste Clown. The word for fool is a different word.
Na.
Instead, what's more widely believed to have happened was that Belling copied the Régichy clowns he saw when he toured with the Russian circus. And over time, legends were born about him being the first American Auguste Clown. So what did and didn't happen is up for debate. However, Belling did have a career as a clumsy clown, albeit rather short-lived. Belling would actually go on to become a magician, but that still doesn't answer why we call them Auguste clowns. According to an anonymous European etymologist, the circus usage stems from a Viennese clown who achieved his popularity by acting very silly and very ditzy. Because his name was Auguste, the crowd would chant for him to come out by saying Der dumme Auguste, and I'm sorry by the way about my German, but basically in German this just meant Auguste the Fool or Auguste the Stupid, and soon this chant became shortened down and used as slang. So Auguste the Fool became just Auguste, and it would go on to mean the same thing as a fool. The meaning would stay intact for the audiences at that time, not as a replacement replacement for the word fool in German, but as a name associated with a foolishly behaving clown. So this phenomenon would catch on with other circuses, and when people just wanted to see a funny or silly clown, they would shout for the Auguste, and because Auguste clowns were nothing like white-faced clowns, they went on to be called Auguste Clowns. So Auguste became a way to say, hey, that clown is being very foolish or silly, and then as the circus evolved, the role of being the Auguste would fit these characters who were known to become the comic relief. So it's sort of like the way that we use the slang terms Chad or Karen, but for silly clowns. So as far as the origins are concerned, Belling was one of the first American Auguste clowns, but the legends about him are exaggerated. He wasn't why we call Auguste clowns, but there is documentation enough to know he was one. So if anything, the Auguste clown was created out of a need for a performer to fulfill a role on stage, and that was the role of the lovable klutz. In the theater, it's been a thing since ancient Rome that clowns would serve different purposes on the stage. One of these types of ancient Roman clowns, the stupidest clown, held the role of being the fool or the mimic and went out of their way to do slapstick comedy. Sound familiar? Well, that's because this would eventually evolve into what we know as Auguste clowns all over the world. So now that we understand why they're called Auguste clowns, what exactly are Auguste clowns? It is widely believed that Auguste clowns were direct descendants of a type of Russian clown. These type of clowns are called Rishi clowns. Because I've only read this term in English, I do want to apologize at how I pronounce it. I did ask for help, but I don't know Russian, so I'm not very great at it. But the reason why they're called that, I believe, is because it has something to do with their red hair. So these were clowns that were wearing bright red wigs, and they were based on Russian folklore. They would wear these big red brushed up wigs and red makeup on their nose and mouth, and the bright red brushed up wig came from a gag where a clown with an exaggerated nose would blow his nose and it would light up like a light bulb, and the hair would be shocked straight up like an electrocution. And these clowns were also known for like taking pratfalls and engaging in physical comedy and opposing the white-faced clown. So that was the clowns I was talking about earlier when we were discussing how Tom Belling went to Russia and saw these type of clowns. So Tom Belling was influenced by Russian clowns, and he wasn't the only one. But that's just the beginning of the story. As for the modern Auguste, we can separate them in two groups: European Augustes and American Augustes. The American Auguste would evolve somewhat from the European Auguste, but the European Auguste ultimately did come first. Ironically enough, the Auguste clown would come from the need of an actually truly funny and relatable clown in Europe. You see, in 1800s Europe, the posh European white-faced clown was all the rage. Both elegant and glamorous, this type of clown was viewed as a more serious and posh form of entertainment. Because of this, it almost defeated the idea of the clown itself as we know it. As rich people flocked in droves to watch these types of performances, and pantomime was at an all-time high, the poorer audiences yearned for something human, real, and relatable. The author and clown historian Tristan Remy theorized that people desire the opposite of these glamorous and well put together clowns because they couldn't see themselves in this type of clown. This need for a different type of clown to emerge in Europe came to fruition through a clown named James Guyon, who would appear at the Hippodrome de la Alma and inspire many other clowns to be looser and more silly and fun with their act. Although it's hard to say which clown really truly started the trend, these types of clowns, much like Tom Belling mentioned earlier, would pop up around this time and fulfill this need for this type of clown, calling back to the grotesque white-face Grimaldi. Finally, a clumsy, lovable, silly, and sometimes dim-witted clown that wasn't in control, beautiful, or most importantly, a boss, gained the favor of normal working class people that made up the crowd. This clown wasn't a ringmaster or ringleader type of clown, and the audiences had grown very tired of watching well-rehearsed, fantastical clowns respond brilliantly to the physical comedy of these clown acts. At the time, Auguste clowns were mostly just singular performers. Unfortunately, the European white-faced clowns of the time felt like it was insulting to call an Auguste a clown. They didn't consider these clowns to be clowns, and if someone called a European whiteface an Auguste, it was an immediate sign of disrespect. Because of this, Auguste clowns were mostly working alone. That was until the clown duo Pierantoni and Saltamontes, who were brothers. They explored different dynamics within clowning, and they had a more playful Auguste relationship with one another since they were related. One played a white-faced clown and the other played an Auguste. So this clowning relationship would go on to inspire one of the most famous and notable Auguste clowns of all time, Raphael Padilla. Raphael was born in Cuba, Havana, to parents who were enslaved on a Cuban plantation. They escaped in 1878, but when they did this, they left Raphael, who was a newborn at the time, with another previously enslaved woman that they thought they could trust. But when he got to be a little bit older, she would sell him to a Spanish businessman named Patricio Castano for 18 ounces of gold. It's because of this that Raphael was born without a surname, and it's the belief of many historians that his last name, Padilla, came from his Spanish master's wife. But it is also thought that the last name Padilla was simply just made up by a French coroner upon his death because they knew that he came from Cuba. Although slavery had been banned in 1862 in Cuba, that didn't just immediately stop it from continuing to happen, and it most certainly did not stop the Castanos from purchasing Raphael and enslaving him. He lived a very hard life with the Castanos, who refused to help him with his education and made him sleep in the farm stables. At around age 15, he would finally escape to Bilbao, where he would work odd jobs. Here is where he would practice dancing, strength training, and other various forms of entertainment in the late-night cafes for a little bit of extra money, and then he would work odd jobs that he could find during the day. Around 1884, he would be, quote, discovered by Tony Grice. Grice, who was an entertainer and clown for the Price Circus, would say that Raphael simply caught his eye because he was funny. But the reality of the situation is that Raphael was a vulnerable young black man, and that was something that was profitable for Grice because he was seen as exotic. Some reports will say that Raphael was given this amazing opportunity to become the apprentice to Grice in exchange for room and board and pocket change, but I think we need to be honest about this history. Tony Grice bought and enslaved Raphael. And this is confirmed by reports that when Raphael wasn't apprenticing and learning about the theater under Grice, he was serving him and his family in Grice's private life. It's even documented that Grice forced Raphael to perform in minstrel shows and billed him sometimes as an African savage to different types of audiences in the United Kingdom. A lot of people don't know that minstrel shows were not a uniquely American thing. Although popularized in America, people in other countries both performed and indulged in these disgusting pastimes. I also would like to point out that in the Wikipedia article for Raphael Padilla, it's written that Tony Grice himself was an Auguste clown, but I haven't found this to be true, as within searching about Auguste clowning's origins in both English and translating French, it's Raphael himself who helped shape Auguste clowning, not Grice. I just wanted to add this portion here in case someone reads the Wikipedia article and is confused. From what I could discover about Tony Grice, he was a European white-faced clown and acrobat, and he believed that European white-faced clowning was the gold standard. Much like I had mentioned earlier about how European white-faced clowns felt insulted that Auguste clowns were called like clowns, this is also how Tony viewed Auguste clowning, and he was so pompous about being a European white-faced clown, he also vowed to never ever travel to America, even if it were to benefit his career. But he had no problem pushing Raphael into roles that were lower than he deserved. And he had no problem taking his money when he did these shows. And I think it's really important to talk about this conversation because a lot of times when we talk about blackface and we talk about minstrels, a lot of people say that this is just a uniquely American problem, but this was actually a global problem. This was a problem that affected Black people in many different countries. And this actually affected Raphael and his treatment his entire life in Europe. So I think it's really important that we explain that. Tony Grice was a man that enslaved Raphael Padilla, and he profited off of him, and he forced him into doing minstrel shows. And I think we need to make sure people know that he was not a good guy. He was not an Auguste Clown. He was a stuck-up European white-faced clown that made money off of someone else's talent. And unfortunately, there are a lot of different attempts to water down history and make it more palpable to hear when it comes to Raphael's story. There was actually a movie made about Raphael, and it completely glosses over all of this history with Tony Grice. So I just wanted to do my due diligence and explain to everybody this period of Raphael Padilla's life. Raphael also just said himself, he said, "I hate working for Grice." He would often try to run away in desperation for freedom and then have to come right back because there was no jobs. He could not find work in Europe, especially as a Black man. And this is something that Grice knew, and he took advantage of it. With that being said, as Grice taught Raphael what he knew about performing so he could profit from him, they would begin working for the Nouveau Circus of Joseph Auler, and this is where Raphael would make his debut in Paris during October 1886. This is where Grice would give Raphael his stage name. And unfortunately, the stage name that Grice chose for Raphael was Chocolat. So unfortunately, Grice called him Chocolate in French. Although some articles say how it was just an innocent name at the time, I think it still puts it into perspective that his exoticness, quote, was something people oogled at and others felt they could profit off of. However, something special would happen. Raphael would begin to outshine Grice and would eventually become so successful that he could finally get away from him. And this would happen when their manager would notice that Raphael was the more talented performer in this so-called duo. So once he saw that Raphael was basically worth way more than Grice, he hired Raphael as a standalone performer. When he did this, he gave Raphael his own show, and it was insanely successful. From then on, Raphael became so famous and so fashionable, he would often be seen living a very posh life amongst the lively French nightlife. And he would do this by wearing very fine suits and beautiful clothing down to the gloves. He would incorporate this into his clowning. Unfortunately, for audiences, to see a Black man in a suit was absurd to them. They just found it silly, but he decided that he wanted to keep wearing it because he made it part of his image going forward. And it meant a lot to him that he was a Black man in a good suit. Also, this image of a clown wearing a good suit would be copied moving forward. Raphael himself also did not use any makeup at all. Instead, he was simply just himself. It was how he acted which made his character. Although this lack of makeup was also because people were very infatuated with his skin color being so different to their own, and it was seen as a selling point of him being Chocolat. Finally, having broke through as a star, Raphael would work with many different famous clowns at the time, and this would catch the eye of another clown named George Foutit. George and Raphael would team up and become wildly successful together, although both were already successful on their own. They would model their act off of the previously mentioned clown duo Pier Antoni and Saltamontes, who were brothers. Their dynamics would inspire Foutit and Raphael to play off of of one another as a comedic pairing, but in a different way. Foutit and Raphael would take this idea and take it even further into history as they became well known for their clown entrees, which was basically a way of saying their scripted sketch comedy. It had to be scripted because neither of them spoke very good French and they were performing in the French circus, so they relied on a lot of pantomime and physical gags together that they already had scripted. When Raphael and Foutit would perform together, Raphael would often perform different actions than the audience expected, defying the expectations of what the audience thought the relationship was between the two, as visually the audience had already deemed the very white Foutit to be Raphael's master or someone in a higher society standing. It would completely catch the audience off guard when things would happen on the stage they didn't expect. For instance, if Foutit slapped Raphael, Raphael would slap Foutit back. He would also challenge him and challenge his authority. He would egg him on in different ways. He would turn around the situation to his advantage in a playful way. They came off more like siblings or brothers, and this was a very strange dynamic because from this point, European white-faced clowns were mostly seen as these pompous, fancy, kind of snooty clowns. So finally, the audience was seeing humanity in a clown. They were seeing somebody protest back at this form of power which was represented by Foutit. However, because racism was alive and well, some just thought that the absurdity of the dynamic of a black clown and a white clown slapping each other around or pestering one another was funny. That's really all it was at face value, but it really was a lot more than that for the time. And Raphael did say that he did try to put in a lot of these type of things into his clowning because he finally had the freedom to do so. Although the movie did face inaccuracies, there was accuracy when it did come to the depictions of the clown acts performed by Foutit and Raphael. And also, something that was mentioned by the movie is that Foutit was rumored to be a gay man. Foutit faced his own forms of prejudices and hardships due to his sexuality. The two teamed up together and played into stereotypes to find more success together than apart. In spite of this success, the success itself was still under a racist spotlight because Raphael was a part of a very racist world. It didn't matter how much fame or success he had, it still poisoned everything. And because of the popularity of minstrel shows going around at the time, some of the portrayals of Raphael in the media reflected this. Sometimes they would give him the red lips seen in minstrel makeup on different types of posters. In spite of Raphael himself never wearing any makeup for his performances as Chocolat, it really shows a lot about the way that they viewed Raphael. Raphael also landed a contract in the year 1900 with the French brand Félix Potin, where he advertised their chocolate, and many of the different posters were made with his likeness. Unfortunately, these posters were also racially insensitive in today's world, as they painted him as inferior to his white partner Foutit. He was also depicted by the famous artist Toulouse-Lautrec, who had painted many other clowns and peers of Raphael, but when he painted Raphael, he depicted him with a stereotypical racist features. He made caricatures of him that almost looked ape-like. Raphael himself criticized Lautrec for this, and the two men even knew each other well in the same social circles, which was even more of an insult. Eventually, Foutit and Raphael would part ways, but it wasn't anything negative or bad. Raphael just wanted to move on and do more serious work, and their contract would just not be renewed in 1905. Some attributed this to people becoming more aware of the racial insensitivity of their act, and some also thought it could be that maybe the popularity of the circus was dying. But Raphael wanted to move on. Unfortunately, life for him after this was very unkind. He tried his best to lead a better life and take advantage of his success as a comic and clown, but when he tried to expand to the traditional theater and land more serious acting roles, it was seen as a flop and he was criticized. Even so, he would still make time to visit sick children in the hospitals and cheer them up, and he would receive a Medal of Merit for this type of charity. Raphael would eventually plan to go back to the circus in 1917, but unfortunately, he would never make it back under the big top as he would faint on the evening of his first performance back and die the
the next day in a hospital of a heart attack. The worst part is that when he died, he was just forgotten, not only by French society, but by the press, with only one article written on his sudden death. And for someone who had done so much for entertainment, who was so wildly famous, it was really insane how they treated him. Imagine if a popular actor today were to die, and the only news about it was one column. Even worse, it was so absurd that when he died, he was buried anonymously in a common grave reserved for the poor. Nobody could figure out where Raphael was buried or find any information about Raphael. He just simply was buried, and that was it. It wasn't until 2015, with the use of records from a cemetery registry, they were able to find the resting place of where exactly he was buried, and they did honor and identify him with a commemorative plaque in Bordeaux Cemetery, so people can actually go and visit him now and pay tribute to him. And I'm just happy that they did this, but I'm also sad that he died the way that he did, and then it took until 2015 to find him. I wish I could explain better how famous he was too, because this is still so insane that he went this unnoticed. But the saddest part is, it's also not surprising. This is just even more example of the terrible racism he was facing in Europe, and how even though he had done so much for himself and tried to better his life, in the end of his life, he couldn't. They wouldn't see him as more than a clown. And even when he tried to do better and get away from different people, whether it was Grice or the family that he lived with when he was young, he still couldn't get away. And the saddest part was, he couldn't even get away from clowning. He had to clown in order to make money, and that was something he was stuck with. And I think that is really poignant and important to his story, because in the end, he tried to turn things around and he couldn't. So we need to do our best by honoring him and his story. Because Raphael contributed so many things to Auguste clowning going forward. He would present the idea that you could be a clown without makeup, with just your skin tone. And he would also show that a sketch comedy dynamic between the whiteface and Auguste clown could exist, where the Auguste clown could challenge and defy the whiteface clown. The dynamic didn't need to be just brotherly, like with the aforementioned Pier Antoni and Saltamontes, and could highlight the comedy of a complex social dynamic happening between someone in power and someone without it. He explored physical gags and planned and rehearsed comedy sketches in a comedic duo. No longer were opulent European white-faced clowns with their beautiful yet snarky displays of acrobatics seen as the gold standard of the circus, but instead, a new form of comedy emerged, one where the white-faced clown and the Auguste clown worked together and were equal. And the beloved underdog finally paved its way into the big top. We as clowns should celebrate it loudly that it was a black, formerly enslaved man who changed the circus at a time when he had everything against him. And although his life ended unfairly, we can still try to honor him and his contributions to this art form by understanding this story in its entirety for what it truly was, without hiding the parts that are harder for some people to hear. From then on, the Auguste dynamic in Europe would be very popular, but it would evolve yet again because of a man named Albert Fratellini. Albert, who you may remember me have mentioning before on this channel, was born in 1886. He was actually born the year that Raphael debuted in the Nouveau Circus, but when Albert was born, he was born to a family of circus performers. Albert and his two brothers would rotate out doing clown acts in pairs, much like the skits that we saw performed by Raphael and Foutit, until they got the idea to change a clown act with 2 people into a clown act with 3 people. They were actually the catalyst for the Three Stooges.
Albert's brother, Francois Fratellini, would play the European whiteface. Albert would play the Auguste, and their third brother Paul would play a fusion of the two. Sometimes Paul would take sides with one brother over another depending on the act. It would be Albert who would come up with the idea of the red clown nose to set his character apart visually from Francois and Paul. This would be widely considered the origin of the big red clown nose seen today. Sometimes called the world's smallest mask, this clown nose would emphasize that Albert's character was very different from the posh white face that Francois played. While Paul's character used red makeup on his nose, it wasn't as exaggerated as Albert's. Seeing the three of them together almost looks like a Pokemon evolution, but this visual difference helps us see that there is something going on from far away if we're in the crowd. It wasn't just the nose that Albert came up with either, but the idea that you could use makeup to create an entire other visual gag. He would highlight his mouth and eyes to be bigger so that he could pull off more expression. The way that he used black from his eyes to forehead resembled a happy expression, while the black around the lips looked like an open mouth laughing. He brought the optical illusion to the Auguste Clown and clown makeup going forward. Alongside Fratellini, another Auguste would garner fame and recognition. Charles Adrian Weddish, or as the clown world knows him, Grock, was born in 1880 and was what we know today as a more classic European Auguste. Wearing little makeup and highlighting just his mouth, he would also wear a bald cap. He loved to wear oversized suits and played into many physical comedy gags. Although Grock was known for being a very talented musician, Grock's acts would often center around his music. And one thing very unique about him and his take on clowning was not only his exaggerated clothing, but the fact that he would stray away from the idea that he needed to work in equal pairs. He did work with other clowns, but when he did so, he was the spotlight. No longer was the Auguste Clown the silly clown that was paired up in the dynamic with someone else to the point that it was equal stage time. Grock was really the star. His type of clothing would also begin to inspire other clowns, especially American Auguste clowns. Ultimately, though, Grock is known as the king of the clowns, and at one point was one of the highest paid clowns in Europe. An Auguste fusion of both Fratellini and Grock would emerge in the 1900s with the addition of Coco the Clown. Coco, whose real name was Nikolai Polyakov, was a Jewish man born in the Russian Empire. Coco is considered to be one of the most famous European clowns of the 20th century, and his makeup takes elements from both Grock and Fratellini. But he opts to accentuate his features naturally, using putty to build up his nose and keeping his skin tone a part of the makeup look. Adding a little bit of blush to the nose and around the face for a flushed look, he uses a white mouth but accents the color black to create an exaggerated cartoon-like smile, almost like an emoji. He does the same around the eyes. It isn't as exaggerated as Fratellini, nor is it as understated as Grock. Because of Coco's unique upbringing in Russia, he was exposed to the Rishi clowns mentioned earlier, combining their use of the vibrant and zany red hair and style of comedy, and exaggerated yet natural nose shape, with the aforementioned makeup of the more popular traditional European Auguste clowns. Coco the Clown was a man of many achievements, and he would go on to pass clowning down to his son Michael, who would keep the Coco the Clown name in the family. It would be Michael, or Coco the Clown Jr., who would go on to invent Ronald McDonald as we know him, redesigning him in 1960 and giving him his iconic red and yellow look. I think it's interesting that he chose bright red hair for Ronald, as it does tie back to the Rishi clowns his father was also inspired by, and in some ways an homage to their roots. Yet that's just my speculation and is more or less unconfirmed. With all of these iconic examples of Auguste clowning in Europe, Auguste clowning was reaching the United States, as many different types of European Auguste clowns were visiting and performing in circuses there. One thing about circus culture that is very interesting is that clowns from different countries would travel to be in different circuses around the world. Sometimes managers from circuses would even go to different circuses abroad just to poach their talent. So with the influence and influx of European Auguste clowns entering America, an American form of Auguste clowning would begin to emerge. Where European Auguste clowning mostly initially emerged from a need for humanity, American Auguste clowning would be an exaggerated form of that clowning, one that relied more on physical comedy and character acting much more exaggeratively than what was previously seen in Europe. This would be illustrated by circus legend Lou Jacobs. Lou Jacobs was originally a white-faced clown, but he disliked this type of clowning because it hindered his expression. He was eventually influenced by the extremely cartoon makeup choices and exaggerated nose of Albert Fratellini. Lou would use an artificial pinhead to create more forehead space and exaggerate his proportions to an audience, adorning his false cone head with a tiny hat. As for his clothing, Lou was very inspired by another Auguste before him, Grok, also wearing a baggy fitted suit. Lou was somewhat of a living cartoon who did prop comedy much like Grok, but is credited as the innovator of many different gags, such as a self-propelled bathtub and creating the clown car. I go into more detail about Lou Jacobs and his title of being a master clown in my video here on YouTube called The Master Clowns for those that are interested. Overall, the American Auguste Clown is a slapstick clown, taking pies to the face and getting into a lot of different shenanigans that paint him to be ditzy, clumsy, and somewhat innocent-hearted. This clown evokes childlike wonder and a sense of innocence, while also being the fool in the onstage dynamic between himself and other clowns, in contrast to the European Auguste who evokes more humanity and relatability with his blunders, like for instance appearing on stage and stumbling a little because he might be drunk. This is something that the audience that is an adult audience can relate to. So now that we understand Auguste clowns and their history more, let's get into being able to visually identify them. There are two main types of Auguste clown makeup, the Auguste and the Auguste Light. Modern Auguste clown makeup includes a base coat of flesh tones, but can be exaggerated with blush tones that complement the natural skin tone. Sometimes these tones can also be a little bit unnatural, like bright pink or orange. And the reason is to keep the humanity of the clown instead of a full face of white makeup. However, sometimes there are more cartoonish exaggerated types of Auguste, and you see that with the more Fratellini style of Auguste clowns. Overall, you're going to see more flesh tone than you are seeing a full base of white makeup. White makeup is used, and it is applied to the mouth and around the eyes strategically to bring more attention to them, and depending on the person's face or character, this area will be applied differently or different shapes in order to complement the way that this person's face is shaped. The features and accents of the Auguste clown are also a lot bolder. There is more of a use of borders here around the eyes and mouth, with thick black lines sometimes being used for contrast, and red or bright pink blushes. Sometimes the lips are red or black, but sometimes the top lip is just white. There really isn't a rule that says what colors and what type of accents an Auguste clown needs to use, unless you're really going to be doing like competitive clowning, which yes is a thing. But Auguste clowning overall is something that a lot of clowns play with. You can be very exaggerated and go for a more Fratellini cartoon look, but some people kind of like to meet in the middle, and it really is about how to use your features in a way that helps benefit your clown. And I think that's what makes clown makeup so special, is that everybody has a different face, so there are a lot of different makeup possibilities for everybody out there, and this really shines with the Auguste makeup style. Auguste clowns also usually make use of the classic red nose here more than any other type of clown, most likely a callback to Fratellini himself. I feel a classic clown nose really suits the Auguste clown, which makes sense as the clown nose was quite literally made for this type of makeup style. So overall, if you're trying to identify what type of clown you're looking at and you notice this clown looks like a cartoon or it's very wacky and it doesn't have a full face of white makeup but there is white around the eyes and mouth, you are most certainly looking at an Auguste clown. These clowns can stand far away and it really does look like there is a cartoon in the circus ring. One of the reasons why Auguste makeup is so beloved is because it's extremely universal. It's amazing for all different skin types, all different facial structures. It looks amazing and you can customize it to your own face shape. For me, I have almond shaped eyes, so this is the way that I do the white of my eyes. As for my lip design, I have pretty chubby cheeks, so I bring the white up and that really accentuates the smile from far away. These are techniques that people use to accentuate their features, and I think it's wonderful and it's really fun to play with. I actually use different designs on my Auguste Clown look, and I utilize this look in real life. I think that Auguste Clowns are just absolutely the cutest and the best. So if you're looking to do some Auguste Clowning, just a tip would be, if you are experimenting with putting white makeup on your top lip, put the white and then go in with a powder, and that will set it so that the makeup on the bottom lip won't get on the top lip.
So, not only is there Auguste makeup, but there is also a second type called Auguste Light. The Auguste Light is coined by Clowns of America International, and it is what it sounds like. It is an Auguste clown that's use of makeup and overall design is a little bit lighter, more playful and airy. The bold and super exaggerated look of some of the more classic Auguste clowns like Fratellini and Lou Jacobs is simply just toned down here. I find these clowns to be delightful and whimsical, and Grok would be a great example of the Auguste Light makeup. Actually, you do see a lot of examples of Auguste Light makeup in Europe, and I do wonder if that has something to do with Raphael Padilla himself not having to wear makeup and using that as his portrayal of an Auguste clown. I do see a lot of examples of Auguste Light makeup in American children's clowns. A lot of children's clowns opt for a soft Auguste look as to present a warmer, more human clown to children, and the natural skin tone is more apparent, while the white face usually needed for the stage isn't really necessary when you're working so close with your audience. So especially here in the United States, where there's a cultural fear of clowns, I have noticed that a lot of working clowns opt for an Auguste Light type of makeup. And this makeup is found all around the world, from Europe to Latin America. You can find this everywhere. It's not just found in one place. There are Auguste clowns and Auguste Light clowns all over the world.
A lot of people think that clowns just disappeared in America, especially because as clowns became something that Americans feared, they pretty much started to see them less and less. But you know what? We actually didn't go anywhere. If anything, there are a lot of clowns out there who just perform with Auguste Light. So you will see face painters, magicians, bubble blowers, all these different types of party clowns with this lighter makeup. Some don't even use the makeup at all, but they're still technically a clown. So contrary to popular belief, clowns didn't go anywhere.
So now that we understand the makeup, what about the clothing? Most Auguste clowns will make sure that they are wearing something baggy so that they can get away with doing a lot of different activity levels, because being an Auguste clown is an active role in the theater. It provides a lot of benefits because they're able to be agile and free, and their clothing isn't really suffocated by rhinestones or anything that can't be cleaned. So this is actually a type of clothing when used in the theater that the Auguste chooses so that he can move around freely, and it's washable, it's comfortable. These are the kind of things that an Auguste clown actually working on stage would look for. But as for the overall design of the clothing, there isn't any rules to the Auguste costume, especially as the Auguste clown has become so many different things in clowning. It's no longer just a specific comedic role on a stage, so it can also be a children's entertainer or a type of makeup used for a clown character. But visually, like most clowns, they do try to play into exaggeration when it comes to proportions and the way that the audience sees them, as clothing and makeup can tell you a lot about a character before they open their mouths, and Auguste usually want to let people know that they're silly. The Auguste often wear oversized coats, wide lapels on their shirts, big shoes with fun contrasting. Famous examples being Lou Jacobs and his super tiny hat but oversized bald cap creating a pinhead, head, and Grok, who wore his very famously extremely oversized suit, which made him look very tiny. The Auguste also makes use of lots of different and contrasting patterns, which some refer to in the clowning industry as a tailor's nightmare because of how contrasting and silly the outfits can become. But the fun part about the Auguste is he's supposed to be silly, so the sky really is the limit when it comes to an Auguste outfit.
Auguste clowns are known for taking the pie. Did you know that when a clown throws a pie at another clown, it is not full of whipped cream, but it's actually full of shaving cream? And the reason for this is because shaving cream is a lot easier to clean. Some people don't know, but if you use actual whipped cream in a pie gag, when it gets onto the clothing, it smells just terrible. It can stain the clothing, it can leave a grease spot. It's not practical for people that are doing this gag over and over again. And some performing Auguste clowns even opt for more simple clothing because it's easier to clean. So I thought it would be fun to just share this with you, as some people think that when you take a cream pie, that the cream pie is filled with whipped cream, and actually it is filled with shaving cream.
Over time, Auguste clowning has made its way from the stage and the circus to birthday parties and the internet. Whether or not you are doing traditional Auguste clowning on a stage, or you're using the makeup style to create your own clown character, I hope that you have enjoyed learning about Auguste clowns today with me and their complicated yet interesting evolution throughout history. This is a style of clowning that, although has been through many different iterations, is still a popular favorite among regular, everyday working clowns and found all over the world. Do you think you learned a lot today about Auguste clowning? Well, let's see if you can get these questions right and really flex what you've learned about Auguste clowning. Question number 1. A clown in a large suit stumbles on stage drunk, immediately trips over his pant legs, and face plants onto the floor. The audience laughs, relating to some degree. This is an example of what type of clown? A. Whiteface, B. European Auguste, C. Pierrot, or D. American Auguste? If you guessed the European Auguste, you would be correct. This type of Auguste creates laughs from moments the audience can relate to directly and is seen as more down to earth and human. Question number 2. A clown is doing their makeup. Their eyes and mouth are both outlined with white, but they're using black contrasting makeup to draw themselves giant cartoon eyes and a mouth. They finished off the look with a huge red clown nose. Who might this Auguste clown have been inspired by? A. Lou Jacobs, B. Grok, C. Coco the Clown, or D. Albert Fratellini? If you said A or D, you are correct. Trick question. This Auguste clown makeup was popularized by both Albert Fratellini and Lou Jacobs. Question number 3. A clown is doing their makeup. They outline their mouth with white and their eyes, and they use a little bit of red on their mouth with just a tiny little bit of blush. What style of Auguste makeup is this? A. Classic Auguste makeup, B. Whiteface clown makeup, C. Auguste light makeup, or D. Mime makeup? If you guessed Auguste light makeup, you are correct. Auguste light makeup keeps things simple. Question number 4. Clown A and Clown B are going for a walk. Clown A trips Clown B. Clown B falls, and Clown A laughs, not realizing Clown B is going to trip him back. Clown A falls to the ground, distracted by his laughing, before he can realize what's going on. This is an example of a clown duo popularized by which of the following? A. Joseph Grimaldi, B. Futit and Raphael Padilla, C. The Fratellini brothers, or D. Grok? If you said B. Futit and Raphael Padilla, you are correct. They popularized the dynamic between the whiteface and the Auguste clown and performed in pairs.
Question number 5. A clown speeds on stage in a clown car. A clown dressed as a police officer chases after him. When the clown gets out, he's 6 feet tall. The policeman is much smaller than the clown in the tiny car. This is an example of what type of clowning? A. European Auguste. B. Whiteface. C. Pantomime. Or D. American Auguste. The answer is D, American Auguste. American Auguste clowning is more physical and exaggerated and was popularized by Lou Jacobs, inventor of the clown car. Well, that's the end of the quiz. Thank you so much for playing. I hope it was fun, and most of all, I hope you learned something. Thank you so much for learning about clown history today with me. And if you'd like to learn some more and just see a bunch of different fun clown-themed videos, please like and subscribe. I'm always looking to build my circus here. Bye!